Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. 10 names. This is the book of the generations of Adam. So what's the point of genealogies? As you know, Genesis 5 is a genealogy. And I heard a missionary give a talk once about taking the Bible into African tribal villages. And sometimes they had the goal to translate the whole Bible, but they would sometimes take bits and pieces out of the Bible and try to introduce the concepts to these tribal villagers so that some of them might embrace this truth and would help in the translating. And so doing that meant that they had to pick and choose what was being told. Well, almost always you cut out the genealogy because, who wants to learn a bunch of names? Like, how is that going to change anyone's life when you think about it? And I'm sure you've asked that question yourself. Well, so they would go right into the stories. Well, after years and years of doing this, they, one time, one of these tribes embraced the truth. And the whole tribe, and they're like, we want to know the whole story. That we like these stories, And so they went kind of back to the beginning and started painstakingly translating the whole thing. Well, when they started doing the genealogy, the people in that tribe were like, wow, why didn't you tell us that why didn't you start at the beginning, basically? And they're talking about the start of the book of Matthew. And they're saying, if you had done this, we would have embraced this a long time ago. And in fact, they would take it to other tribes where they had failed miserably, and they would start again. But they would use the genealogy, and it worked every single time. So they looked into this, and it all kind of makes sense when you think about it. Now go way, way back to the old days of when this story might have first been told. You have a lifestyle which is much, much different than the lifestyle of today. Imagine yourself kind of this hunter-gatherer. Every day, you wake up in the morning, you don't have a refrigerator, so you're like, what am I going to eat today? And so you gather up with all the other men, and you go out, you hunt. Let's say you come back with woolly mammoth or whatever, you bring it all back, you drag it in. Then you got to think of, what do I do with this thing? You got to eat the whole thing or throw it away. You've got a lot of these serious challenges every single day. Then you're tired, you plop down in front of the fire. You've got no TV, right? And so what do? Well, you tell stories. And, on our TV, we can flip between the channels. And we may flip between Fox to CNN to Discovery Channel. And I think when we flip channels, we tend to know, well, this is news. Okay, this is a sitcom. And, this is probably not a real story. It's just funny to make me laugh. And then this here is a biography on Thomas Jefferson, right? Well, we have these forms in place where almost instantly what this is. And even like a epic movie, a biopic, right? We know exactly about how true that is. Like we know that this is probably a true event where the director took some artistic license and all of that. Well, in the tribal days, they had, they would tell stories, but it wouldn't always be the same story. They would tell stories, they might tell some tall tales, But then maybe when the evening got to be a little later, a little more serious, they would actually tell true stories. And the way that they would start off with true stories is that they would do a genealogy. So, I mean, this is kind of a typical thing they found in like lots of tribal places, which means that it would be that way in the ancient books. As you see coming up, we've got some pretty tall tales, and so I think this genealogy is important to secure the fact that this is real history. And if you look in the Bible at all the genealogies, you'll find out that after you reach the point in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, there are no more genealogies. You know, there's 2 in the New Testament, and both of them end in Jesus Christ. And so, you have to ask yourself, what is the point of all these genealogies? Because the Old Testament has quite a few. And what happened after that? Well, I would say that the Holy Spirit, or God, and all the writers of the Bible really did this to validate one person, which is Jesus Christ. And as I turn to the book of Matthew, I want to point out a peculiarity here. Matthew opens with words that are very similar to Genesis 5. It says in the opening chapter of Matthew, "This is the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ." Now, did you catch that? This is the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Nowhere else in the Bible, except these 2 places, do we have a phrase like this. This is the book of the genealogy of ... And as you look at the word Adam in Genesis 5, you see, you remember that we use the word Adam and the word man interchangeably. Now, when you read your modern Bible, they pick one, usually depending on whether it's the name Adam or whether it's the common word man, and usually it makes sense, but you do have to pick every time. So what if we chose the word man instead of Adam? Then Genesis 5 would open like this. This is the book of the generations of man. And Matthew 1 would open like this. This is the book of the generations of Jesus Christ. There's a definite connection between the 2. And it's fascinating because, as you know, I said Genesis 1, 2, 3, and 4 kind of stand alone. And as I mentioned last time, Genesis 4 is almost a finishing out this history which was started by Genesis 1, 2, and 3. So Genesis 4 has the feel of being a closing up the prologue, which would make Genesis 5 kind of the opening chapter of the Old Testament, and Matthew 1 being the opening chapter of the New Testament. And so I think that's very telling, because the Old Testament is basically being called the book of man, and the New Testament is being called the book of Jesus Christ. You may know this, but a lot of old books were called by their opening line. And they even called the ancient Bible In the Beginning, because they considered the book of Genesis the opening line. However, if you call this the opening line, you might call this Old Testament the book of man, and the New Testament the book of God, so book of Jesus Christ. So I wonder about this question. What is it that characterizes these 2 books? If the Old Testament is characterized by man, then it's nothing but sin and rebellion, and especially, as you will see, death. And the Old Testament ends with the word curse. The New Testament, however, is quite different. Thanks, this has been Story Streamer. See you later.